I'm Zim, and you're listening to the Helpful Photographer Podcast in collaboration with New York City Photo Safari. To register for a safari, please visit newyorkcityphotosafari.com. Today I want to talk about dust. Is it on your sensor or is it on your lens? When I'm on location shooting with participants in New York City, oftentimes they'll see dark spots on their images, especially when the sky is just blue or white with clouds. And often they think it's on their lens, but more often than not, it's actually on their sensor. And then there are times when it's neither of these. So how can you figure out where that dark spot came from and what can you do about it? The first and easiest one to figure out is a dark or erroneous spot that is coming from your subject. Yes, your subject. Over this past week, I was out at the Oculus shooting with some participants. The Oculus is a building next to the World Trade Center, and it's an all-white building. While photographing the building, a participant noticed that there was a dark spot on her image. Like everyone else, she assumed it was in her camera. She had taken several compositions of the same location. When I reviewed her images, I noticed that the dark spot moved around the frame, but always on the same spot of the subject matter. For the most part, dust on your sensor would sit in the same spot for at least a few shots or more. Knowing all of this, I looked at the building itself, and there it was, a dark spot on the actual building. This is why it floated around the frame, and this is why it was in the same exact spot on the subject. So the first thing you need to do is to look at the subject itself. If you're clear that it's not the subject itself, then most likely it's on your sensor. Please take note that it's very, very rare that it's something on the lens. To figure this out, take 2 photos of the blue sky with a narrow aperture, like f/22. Once you do that, magnify the playback image and look at every part of the image. And guess what? You're going to see exactly where all the dust is in your image. The reason you want to shoot with a narrow aperture is because it'll help bring out all of the dust. Once you find the dust spot, look at the second photo you took and see if it's in the same spot. If it is, then your problem is on the sensor and not part of the subject you're photographing. Now, if you have a DSLR and you see a spot through your viewfinder, but it's not in your image, then it's on your mirror or in the prism itself. In either case, leave it alone, because it's not going to affect your image in any way, shape, or form. And trying to clean that off will probably introduce more dust onto your sensor. Seriously, just leave it alone. What you need to consider is this. When you're shooting through the viewfinder of a DSLR, you're not actually seeing what the sensor is seeing. So if you see it in the viewfinder, there is no way that it is on the sensor. Furthermore, you're also looking through a lens that is at its widest aperture opening. And when there's that much light scattering around, it's difficult for the dust to show itself. This is why I just suggested that you shoot the blue sky with a really narrow aperture opening. On the other hand, if you're shooting mirrorless, you're actually seeing what the sensor sees. So in that case, it's on the sensor. Another problem is fog. If your images look foggy and there isn't any fog around, it's likely that either the front or the rear element is dirty. However, if your front and back element are both clean, it could be one of these other 2 causes. One is a dirty sensor, in which case I would advise you get that sensor professionally cleaned. The other possible cause is light flare, which means that you're pointing your camera towards the sun and the light is raking across the front of your lens. To solve that problem, simply throw a shadow on the front of your lens, like with your hand or a hood, or point away from the sun a little bit. If you have to shoot towards or at the sun, unfortunately, you're stuck. This brings up the last issue, white spots. If you find that as you point your camera in different directions, away and towards the sun, there may be dots that move around the frame or disappear altogether. These white spots are usually from a combination of light flare and a dirty lens. Cleaning your lens will eliminate most of this problem, but it may not resolve all of your problems. Again, you're shooting towards the sun, and that's the issue. Lastly, although most amateur photographers make a pretty big deal over dust on their lens, I have rarely seen problems presented by a few specks of dust on anyone's lens. And frankly, I've even seen mildew growing inside people's lenses, and it wasn't a problem. As a matter of fact, I saw a fingerprint on the inside element of a lens, which also did not present a problem. How did a fingerprint get on the inside element of a lens is a long story, and I really don't have time to go over that here, but I'll post that story on the website. Okay, that's it. I hope it was helpful. Until next time, keep on shooting.